or Die Show. I am your host, Randi-lee. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Kelly Inviere. Welcome, Kelly. So excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
All right, just start with telling us a little bit about who you are.
Okay, I am a poet, an author, and an artist from the greater Washington, D.C. area. I have been dealing with mental health issues, honestly, my entire life. And I'm someone who really likes to discuss what I've been through in hopes of kind of ending that stigma. So I really love what this show is about.
Awesome.
And yeah, I am married to a beautiful wife, and we have two beautiful fur babies. So
cats or dogs? Which one?
Cats.
Oh, and what are their names?
Kyan and Saren.
I love kitties.
I do too. Huge animal lover.
Yes, me too. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. I needed to know.
No, I completely understand. Those are our babies.
Oh, all right. That's awesome. And how long have you been married for?
It will be 7 years in August.
Wow, that's a nice amount of time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to 9 years, me and my husband.
Congratulations.
Sounds about right. After a while, it just all kind of blends together, right?
Well, and my wife and I have been together since we were in high school. So we're high school sweethearts. So we've been together for, I guess it's coming up on 13 years. So it really blends together. And there's kind of the joke about, the lesbians getting together and then moving in like the next day. So we're not exactly an example of that, but,
I haven't heard that joke, but all right, I'll believe you.
Oh, look it up. There are like moving van jokes. What do you bring to a second date when you're a lesbian?
Wow, that's all right. Well, moving on from there. So I see the giant poster of your book. So
actually, yeah, copy of the book. I decided to just kind of put it in.
No, I love it. I love it. So tell everybody what it says.
So it's called Where the Light Shines Through, a memoir in poetry. And it is just that. I decided to write my memoir in sort of a different way. My words are best expressed, I've found, through poetry rather than a linear narrative. And so I've used poetry as sort of a coping mechanism all of my life. And so it made perfect sense that when I wrote my life, I would write it in poetry.
We are so in sync because, all right, so first, we've both been together with our spouses for like oodles of time because we've actually been together for almost 14 years. So we're following suit. Poetry has always been my coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And that was how I turned my first book, like how I published it was all my poetry of my coping skills. So I love it.
Yeah.
So I haven't finished it yet, but I have started your book and I love it. So like I said, I love poetry. That I write poetry myself, and I have read my whole life. I've always read poetry. Like who writes that Where the Sidewalk Ends? One.
Shel Silverstein.
Yeah, so that was one of the very first poetry books that I ever started reading, like in elementary school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. And I've read different things, and I really liked your poetry because it rhymes. And I know poetry doesn't have to rhyme. I get that. Yeah. But I like it when it does.
I do too. I also like to find interesting ways to pull the rhyme scheme through a poem rather than just have it be at A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D kind of rhyme scheme. I like to find a way to like put the rhyme in the middle of one line and the end of the next.
Yes, I noticed that. But yeah, so I love when poems rhyme. I read another book. I can't even remember who it was because I didn't enjoy it because it didn't rhyme. And again, it's not to say that the poetry was bad. It just wasn't my preference.
It's not your style. Everyone has, art that they like. Some people really love modern art and they, will seek that out. And some people are like, I only like Renaissance classics. So
Exactly. So I love that. And I love that you expressed your story through poetry. So let's kind of dive in here now to your story. And you said that you've been dealing with mental health pretty much your whole life. So wherever it is that you think is the beginning, let's jump on in there.
okay. So I think that a good place to start would be to say that I grew up in what wasn't an ideal home life situation. My mother had her own mental health struggles and did not get the help for them that she needed to. And so it was sort of an abusive situation. And I believe very firmly that there's nature and there's nurture. And I think that I kind of got it from both ends of that spectrum. It runs in my family to have anxiety, depression, and then also growing up in what was a toxic environment in many ways did not help that, or I guess maybe fostered that. And so I can remember by about 7, I was having full-blown panic attacks. Not that that was what they were recognized as or called, but I would have very visceral physical reactions. I unfortunately have all of the very physical sides of my mental health struggle as well as the emotional ones. So I started getting very anxious and getting a nervous stomach and throwing up. And my parents didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And, my father was trying to cope with an unhappy marriage. My father was trying to cope with, how to raise a daughter who, was dealing with this. And my mother was trying to figure it out too, but in her own way. She thought she was helping, but she basically decided that I had bulimia at age 7. And so it wasn't until high school that I, started to really, really see the physical symptoms deteriorate into I got to a point where I was bedridden.
Oh my goodness.
And I was diagnosed at 17 with fibromyalgia.
Oh,
Which could not be more wrong. Not that that is not something that people do suffer from, but that wasn't what was happening for me. And around then, because I was having a lot of difficulty accepting that, I ended up in therapy. And my therapist started to take note of some of the patterns that I was talking about. And at that point in my life, she was getting a little too close for comfort.
okay.
Um,
So what does that mean, too close for comfort?
she noticed that there were issues with my mother,
Okay.
and she noticed that I was scared to talk about them.
Okay.
And so I kind of stepped away from that and, figured I will get through this on my own.
Yeah.
Um, but then by the time that I was 20, I was in a really rough place. My parents' marriage was falling apart. My anxiety was higher than ever. My depression was worse than ever. And I was having a hard time, even eating or showering, just
Yeah, it's
like
been
knowing.
13 years now.
Right. It's been my entire life of, ups and downs, but, the downs were really hard.
Mhm.
And I actually started to self-harm.
Okay.
And
What did that look like for you?
um, I would take a safety pin and simply just prick the inside of my wrist.
I think I read that poem.
I was going to say there is a poem about that in my book,
Okay.
but it was just a way that I felt like I was sort of in control of how to handle that pain.
Mhm.
And I didn't think of it as self-harm because I wasn't making an actual cut.
Okay.
And then I started noticing that I was having suicidal thoughts, and my, at the time, girlfriend was so scared for what, she didn't even know half of it, but she knew that I was struggling and she knew that I was having suicidal thoughts, and she begged me to get help. And I recognized what I was doing was self-harm and was like, I need to get help. So I started back in therapy and have been there pretty much consistently ever since. I am a
Good.
huge proponent of, if you need help, get it. There is
Yeah.
absolutely no shame in getting help if you need it. Um, and then things got a little worse in 2014 when I was 23. My father had an arrhythmia,
Oh.
and that basically just means that the heart's rhythm gets caught off guard and it stops and it causes a cardiac arrest. And so he was in a coma for a week and then he passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And I've unfortunately this past March lost my mother to the exact same thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Like this much, like last month?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness. That is
yeah.
hard. Okay.
Um, and my mother and I had not been speaking for over a year, because it was just not a healthy relationship to have. Um, so I kind of, with my father, had what is called complex grief. And basically that's when you already have things like anxiety, depression, PTSD, all
Yeah.
of which I have, um, you tend to experience grief more strongly. You
Okay.
tend to have a harder time moving through it.
Okay.
And especially if you really depended on that person who you lost, which is definitely the case for my father, I I kind of lost myself.
So were you really close to your dad then?
Extremely. He
Because
was
it
my best
sounds
friend.
like, yeah, it sounds like, and from reading the poems, and what's interesting about how you put your memoir into poetry is that you kind of know what's going on, but it's not exactly like, right? Because you're not saying, I don't know, I was hit. You're saying, and the pain from a bruise or whatever, right? Like I'm just making stuff up off
Right.
the top of my head.
Right.
So every time I would read a poem or a couple, I'd be like, oh, because this one kind of connects to that one and they're the same story or whatever. And I'm a super nosy person. Like I'll fully admit that. I get that from my grandma. She was like that nosy neighbor. Um,
Well, I'm an open book, so we're a good pair right here. You can ask me literally
I
anything.
love it because as I'm reading these, I'm going, what does she mean? Like now I want to know more because it's so interesting how you would talk about it. So you mentioned PTSD. So I'm guessing that came from when you were a child and whatever that abuse looked like. Can you share with us what that abuse was like?
Certainly. So my mother had borderline personality disorder,
Okay.
which for those who aren't familiar with it, it's called borderline because it borders on all of the different personality disorders. So there were days where it was sort of like having someone who was bipolar. There were days where it was somebody who had severe depression. There were days where it was, just very erratic behavior. Um, and she had her own issues with PTSD from childhood abuse and trauma.
Okay.
So rather than ending the cycle, which I know is always what she wanted to be able to do,
Yeah.
she continued it. It would be earlier on mostly verbal and emotional abuse, telling me that I wasn't worth having around, telling me that I wasn't wanted, telling me that she would put me up for adoption.
Were you an only
Um,
child?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a blessing and a curse. You know, at about age 10, my parents, you know, asked how important it was for me to have siblings. And I think that when I was that age, I had reached a point where I realized something was off. And I kind of wanted to protect that unborn child from going through what I was going through.
Okay.
So I told them, I don't just no,
Yeah.
you know, um, I'm happy the way things are. So the problem when you're an only child with a borderline parents tend to pick an all good child and an all bad child. So when you're the only
Oh.
child, you're both.
Mm.
So one day it's, you are my pride and joy, you are my inspiration, you are everything I ever wanted. And the next day it's, you are the worst person ever because you forgot a pen at school.
Oh, that would be very difficult to grow up like that.
Yeah. And as she sunk further into her mental illness, it became more physical abuse. And a lot of the abuse that was physical was directed towards my father, but witnessing that was extremely traumatic.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
So in one of your poems, I don't remember which one, it talked about packing up your things and leaving and calling police and stuff. Can you elaborate on the circumstances around that? Because as I was reading that poem specifically, I was like, wait, what led up to this? What's going on? Like it drew me in and I was like, I need more information.
yeah, absolutely. So my parents' marriage, as I was saying, was starting to really fall to pieces, to shambles. And they basically broke up, but decided to live together when my mother was in the, you know, kind of darkest part of her mental illness. And at one point, my mother and father got into a very physical altercation. Um, my, at that time, fiance and I were both home and could hear everything that happened. We went out into the living room and saw what was happening. And I pulled her back into my bedroom, locked the door, and we called the police because they were very much, you know, in the thrall of it. And I could tell that my mother was beating my father, which was
Oh,
not something I had, you know, seen to that degree before. I'd seen a lot, but not that.
okay.
And so the police came, and that was the end of them living together, at least for that point in time. But they, you know, decided they needed to split, you know, really split. And my mother wanted me to take her side. And because I was at a point where I was in therapy and I was, you know, taking care of myself and, you know, had actually gone to some Codependence Anonymous meetings because, you know, I was trying to figure out and unravel what was going on. And actually, it was at my mother's request because she thought it was my relationship with my wife to be that was codependent. And what I found was,
Oh,
oh, the codependent relation in my life is the person who sent me to a CODA meeting.
wow. Okay.
Um,
We're gonna circle
so
back to that. Yeah.
yeah. So when I didn't agree with her, because she somewhat viewed me as an extension of her, as somebody who she could live the life she wished she could have through.
Yeah, that's what I got from a lot of your poems.
Yeah, she basically told me I can get out of her house, which I wish I could say was the first time, but it was the final time. So we went to the house when she wasn't going to be there. I packed up all of my stuff and I moved in with my wife to be at her parents' house.
Okay. I'm really glad that your now wife was so supportive through all of this because it couldn't possibly have been easy to
Oh,
be in that environment, to know this is going to be my mother-in-law, and to watch your loved one suffer.
Yeah, I honestly don't know where she found the strength. And it took me so long to understand that she was going to love me through anything.
Yeah.
And when we first met in high school, I didn't believe in marriage. I didn't believe that there was such a thing as a happy marriage.
Well, from what you had lived, I mean.
And, unfortunately, in my generation, more people had divorced parents than, happy parents. And so, she came from this happy family. And I'm over here like, okay, but what's really behind the curtain? But the truth is, they're genuinely a happy family.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to make of that. And she has admitted to me multiple times, and I knew at the time, just kind of intuition, she was like, that's the person I'm going to marry. And I was like, no, I'm definitely not. That's not something you want. Trust me. You
Well,
don't
I
want
can
to.
trust her.
Yeah. And that's really what I've learned is I needed to let her make up her own mind about what she wanted. And, bless her, she wanted to love me and help me get out of that situation and care for me and love me through all of the pain that I've been through since.
Yeah, that's awesome. Maybe one day I'll have to meet her too, because she sounds kind of awesome.
She's amazing.
Sounds like it. So now let's circle back to codependency, because I have yet to have a guest really talk about that. And it's a really important kind of concept and to know for people. So explain to everybody what codependency is. In your
So
terms, of
I was
course.
going to say,
We're not doctors. Remember, we're not doctors.
yeah, I was going to say, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. But so my experience with codependency was my mother was unhappy in her life. And so she wanted to be doing all the things that I was doing. She wanted a do-over.
Yeah.
She wanted somebody who would be her best friend who could never possibly leave her. And she has told, had told me at times that that was why she had me, so that she would have a best friend who could never, ever leave her.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening when you have someone giving you that message your entire life is you feel this guilt anytime that you break from that, puppet master dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I did not want to be living for her. I did not want
Live
to
for
be
yourself.
right. I didn't want to be triangulating in my parents' relationship.
Oh.
And yet I found myself in those positions.
Mm-hmm.
And that is extremely codependent behavior on both her part and mine.
Mm-hmm.
Her expecting me to, live for her, and then on my part, enabling that. And so she got it into her head, because I was in a healthy, happy relationship and she was not, that she needed to break me and my, future wife up.
Yeah.
It was just natural. Obviously, this person was taking me away from her and was making me feel healthy and happy, so that needs to go away.
Mm-hmm.
But she basically told us that we had issues with codependency, and both of my parents were in recovery. And so I thought, well, it can't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's frankly, it's basically free therapy. So sure, why not?
It's true.
And what I found out in literally meeting one was, no, my relationship with Phoebe, my wife, is great. It's amazing and supportive and loving and healthy. There is a codependent relationship in my life. It's the one with the person who sent me here.
Yeah. And how did that realization make you feel?
I finally had understanding of what it had been that I was going through, because I know that, a lot of people talk about the stigmas of mental illness. My main stigma was people thinking from the outside, but your life is perfect.
It's a very good point.
And I hate that word now. Like, at this point in my life, it is one of those nails on chalkboard thing, because
Perfect and normal.
yeah, those are curse words in my household.
Yeah.
But from, extended family to, friends to, the medical community, my life was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so from somebody who has that standpoint, recognizing I'm not crazy here.
Yeah.
This isn't normal. This isn't okay. This isn't what you should expect. This isn't the way a mother should be treating her daughter.
Yeah. But when you live in that environment for so long, it becomes your normal.
Right. And
you
that's,
realize it, yeah, until
yeah. And
somebody else
tells you and intervenes. Yeah, I think that for me, it was realizing that just because it was what I was used to doesn't mean that it's normal or acceptable or okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I've not quite the same story, obviously, but in the same kind of idea of I thought this was just normal because this is how I lived. And it wasn't until I became an adult and in therapy and realizing, no, this is not. And again, I'm with you. I hate the word normal, but this is not typical. This is not what should happen. Well, we don't need to be exactly the same as, the family beside us or the one beside them, but we also shouldn't be living in fear. We shouldn't be living walking on eggshells. We shouldn't be living by somebody else's standards.
Yeah, it definitely, my dad used to put it, coming home was sort of that, who am I going to see, the lady or the tiger, when I open the door?
Yeah.
And that was a fairly accurate description of my childhood of growing up. It was, who am I going to get today? Am I going to get my mom, or am I going to get the disease?
Yeah. That's a really hard thing to live with. So my mom doesn't have, well, she's got something, but she's never went anywhere.
Everybody has something.
I don't know. But when I was a teenager, my mom married an alcoholic, and it was that same idea of, who am I going to walk through that door? Who am I going to see? Am I going to see the regular guy stepfather, or am I going to see the alcoholic stepfather who's yelling and throwing things?
Yeah.
So, I mean, different, but I can totally relate to that idea of, I don't know what I'm walking into when I come home after school.
Yeah. And, I can totally relate to that, because my parents, like I said, both of them were in recovery by the time I was born. But my mother, she was kind of what you call a dry drunk at the point where her mental illness was really bad, where you're not getting any help for it. You're not in therapy dealing with it. You're not in, meetings or anything anymore. You think that you're cured.
Yes.
And the thing that I have learned about any mental health, whether that's addiction, whether that is, the things that I struggle with, whether that is, eating disorders, or, literally you name it, if it's something that deals with emotional and mental health, you're never going to be cured.
Yeah.
The
We
way
learn to
that
live with it.
the way that I think of it is, it's like exercising. You go to the gym, you lift 5-pound weights for the first time, and they feel so incredibly heavy. And you're like, I can't do 10 curls with these.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 weeks later, they feel like nothing, and you need those 10-pound weights. You're ready to take those on, but then they feel impossible. I think that grief, anxiety, depression, mental health in general, it's sort of the same thing. You learn to carry more weight as you get stronger.
I love that analogy. I'm going to steal it.
You are welcome to. I gift it to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Because in my day job, I'm a personal trainer.
Yeah.
So that analogy really, when you start talking about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, yes. Right. And so I've never had great upper body strength. I mean, most females, our strength tends to be in our legs.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Right. And so, but at the beginning of COVID, because everything shut down, I'm doing a little more weightlifting than I normally do at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, look at me pumping iron. I'm like poking. I'm like, oh, I got some muscle, right? And so when you were saying that analogy of it, I'm like, yes, 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 100 times yes. The more that, and I'm just gonna, say the more that you go to therapy, and it doesn't necessarily have to be therapy. It can be
No.
whatever your coping mechanism is. Mine was therapy. Well, multiple things, but therapy was the biggest thing, right? The more times you go, the easier it gets.
Mm-hmm. And
Oh,
you will cycle around to the same thing, starting again, starting again, starting again. And that's not a bad thing. Growth is not linear. Growth is a process. And, I have bad days, I have, bad months, but, it doesn't take away from the growth that I've had.
yeah.
It doesn't take away from the things I've accomplished.
My goodness, I feel like I could talk to you forever and ever, but we are getting close to the end of kind of the time frame I like to keep stuff in. So, what coping mechanisms have you learned work the best for you?
So I would say number one is actually going to be therapy. That is, I am a huge proponent. I think that everyone should go to at least one session. Even if you're just going to unpack one session's worth, I think that it's really worth it for people. But then the next thing I would say is writing. Writing, I actually credit with saving my life as well. So yeah, writing was the thing that I think pulled me out of the trenches of complex grief, which, I will be totally open about the fact that I was really not okay at that point.
Yeah.
I was having panic attacks multiple times a day. I was in and out of the ER to get rehydrated because my panic attacks caused cyclical vomiting.
Oh my goodness.
So, I had bruises on my arms from getting IVs. I was a mess, and I started to write about it.
Mhm.
And then I started writing poetry because I remembered how much that helped me in high school through heartbreak and through, the familial difficulties. And as I started writing it, I realized, oh, this is that memoir that I wanted to write.
Mhm.
And so writing my book was my coping mechanism. And I love exercise. I know that you do boxing. I actually also do boxing. I find it
Do
to
you?
be, I do. I absolutely adore it. Seriously, I love it. It is one of the most cathartic things in the world. I recommend it to anyone who has, literally anyone, because who doesn't have stress and anger?
Right?
We're human. We have emotions. And honestly, sometimes that is just the thing that gets me through the day is okay,
Yeah.
I'm just going to punch this out.
Yes.
On more low key days, it's doing some yoga, meditation, things like that. But, keeping active, keeping busy, keeping creative. I'm also a photographer. I'm also a
Cool.
painter, and a sculptor, though I haven't done much of that lately, but, yeah, so I think that that really helps. And then having a really great support network has been really important. And so I'm grateful that I'm fortunate enough to have that and to have built that over the years.
Those are awesome ideas to use. So where can people find your book that I keep, bragging about?
So it's on Amazon for one. And then also I have a website, which is kellyinviere.com. Unusual name. You get to kind of have your own domain.
Yep.
Um,
I'm with you on
so
that one.
I was just going to say, again, another connection.
Yep.
But yeah, kellyinviere.com has links to a couple places where you can get it, including Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And it also has a Kindle version if that's your jam. I know I'm preaching that I love being like able to flip things, but
hey, but as an author, you got to make it available anywhere.
Everybody, literally anybody and everybody. So
Awesome. And where can people follow you? Like, so you told us your website, but you got to be on social media.
Oh, 100%. I have a Facebook page for my poetry, which is facebook.com/kellyinviere poetry. And then my Instagram handle is @kellyinviere. And I'm on Goodreads. Look me up, Kelly Inviere, or Where the Light Shines Through. I don't really do Twitter, but I've just never understood it. I'm the worst millennial ever.
I'm right there with you. Twitter is not.
I can't do it. I can't get into it. I tried. I've tried like 4 times. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
But all of those links are on my website. And then also, if you're there, sign up for my monthly newsletter. And I'm doing a giveaway of my ebook right now. I'll be doing a drawing in the next, probably month or so. So if you sign up for my newsletter when you check out my website, you might get the book for free.
Oh, even better. And of course, all of those links will be down in the description below, especially because Kelly has a unique last name that you probably won't know how to spell, but that's okay because the links are down below. So all you have to do is click. Makes it very easy. So thank you so much, Kelly, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And yeah, you got to come back because I'm cutting you off right now at 40 minutes. So
Randi-lee, I would love to come back. This has been amazing, and it is a privilege to be on the show.
Wow, she was so much fun. I had way too much fun talking to her. A wealth of knowledge just shared so openly. She's had some pretty interesting and hurtful things happen throughout her life. And it's amazing that she has come to a point in her life that she is able to talk about it. And I really appreciate that. As well, if you are one of our patrons on our Patreon page, you're going to get a sneak peek behind the scenes conversation that I had with Kelly after the interview. And we dig a little deeper. Well, first we just kind of talk about cute animals, but we dig a little deeper into some coming out stories and things like that. So it's pretty interesting. I had a great time. I actually had to say, okay, we have to stop talking now because we're just going to keep going and going. So she is super cool. Again, her links are down below in the description. Be sure to give her a follow. If you like poetry, check out her books. Even if you don't, check out her book. I can't say enough good things about it. As well, we have a merch store, so you can go ahead and check that out. Makes great gifts. 10% of the proceeds does go to the Canadian Mental Health Association. And remember that the only way to end the stigma with mental health is to speak openly and honestly.